Ethan Granger wasn't the kind of man who vanished. He was reliable, clean-cut, a 32-year-old patrol officer with a spotless record and a fiancée waiting at home. But on the night of December 17th, 1989, in the town of Ashmoor, Colorado, he answered a call near the Pine Bluff Trail and was never seen again. His cruiser was found the next morning, parked neatly by the forest edge, engine cold, radio static hissing like it had been left mid-transmission. His flashlight lay in the snow, still on. Beam pointed toward the tree line. No blood. No signs of a struggle. Just silence, deep and wrong. Locals whispered that something in those woods doesn't like to be disturbed. That winter, the snow came early. It covered everything, except the dread. And though the town moved on, something beneath the pines stayed awake, waiting, because Ethan Granger didn't just vanish. He was taken. And 7 years later, the woods gave something back. Something that shouldn't have come home. Detective Daniel Mercer was the last one to review the case in 1990 before it was shelved. Now retired, he still kept the file tucked inside his desk at home, unopened for years. But when a storm unearthed a long-buried piece of evidence near the same forest, Ethan's service badge, he knew he couldn't ignore it. The badge was found by a child no one could identify. The boy dropped it at the sheriff's station without a word and vanished before anyone could ask his name. The badge was split in two, scorched around the edges like it had been through fire, but untouched by the snow it had lain beneath. Mercer reopened the file that night. In his notes, he'd written a phrase Ethan once said a week before his disappearance. Something isn't right near Pine Bluff. Something watches. Something remembers. Mercer lit a cigarette with shaking hands and called someone he hadn't spoken to in years. A journalist named Lena Ward. And the only other person who ever came close to finding out what happened. Lena Ward still remembered the voice from the call. It wasn't Daniel's. It was Ethan's. At least, that's how it felt. She hadn't thought about him in years. She was only 13 when he vanished, but he had been kind to her, almost protective. And on the night he disappeared, she'd sworn she saw someone in his uniform watching her from across the street. Not waving, not smiling, just standing perfectly still. Her parents said she was dreaming, but now, with the badge recovered and the date drawing near again, December 17th, she felt the pull return. She booked a flight to Colorado. Her first stop would be Ashmoor's library. If the town still had a soul, it would be buried in the pages of forgotten police logs and microfilm. And if Ethan was still out there, some part of him, she needed to know why he chose to call her, even after death. Ashmoor hadn't changed much. Still a quiet mountain town with empty storefronts, cracked sidewalks, and a gas station that never closed. The people, though, had changed. Older, quieter, watching her with unreadable eyes as she drove through Main Street. Lena stopped at the old ranger station near Pine Bluff. It had been condemned in the early 90s, but she still had the key Ethan had once given her as a child. Just in case you ever want to see where the world ends, he had joked. Inside, dust and silence greeted her. The desk still had his handwriting scrawled in notes. Maps of the forest with red circles and dates she didn't understand. In the bottom drawer, sealed in plastic, was an undeveloped roll of film labeled December 1989. She held it up to the light. It was warped, burned slightly around the edges. Something inside her told her not to develop it, and something else told her it was already too late. That night, Lena stayed in the only motel in town, room 6. The same room Ethan's fiancée had stayed in the week after he vanished. The manager didn't ask for her name, just handed her the key and said welcome back, like he knew she was coming. Snow began falling just after midnight, thick wet flakes that silenced the world. Her phone buzzed, no signal, but the screen glitched. A voicemail notification blinked once, then disappeared. No number, Just the message title, 7 years. She opened it. No sound, only static. Then a voice she hadn't heard in years whispered, "Lena, you weren't supposed to come back." She dropped the phone, looked outside. A shadow stood at the edge of the parking lot, facing her room, unmoving, just like all those years ago. She backed away, heart pounding. But when she blinked, it was gone. The room was silent again, but she already knew. The countdown had started. The next morning, Lena drove out to the edge of Pine Bluff Trail, where Ethan's cruiser had been found 7 years earlier. The snow had melted slightly overnight, revealing patches of ground beneath the trees. Something compelled her to walk into the forest, the same route Ethan had taken that night. The woods felt wrong, not dangerous, not hostile, just aware. She paused near a broken tree stump and noticed a small metal object sticking out from the soil. Brushing it clean, she uncovered a wristwatch, Ethan's, cracked but still ticking. It was set to 12:17 a.m., the exact time his final radio transmission ended. As she turned to leave, her boot crunched over something else. A torn patch of uniform fabric, half buried in frost. Her breath caught. From somewhere deeper in the forest, a faint rhythmic sound began, like a heartbeat. She looked around. Nothing moved, but the ticking of the watch grew louder in her ears, faster, until it stopped. Back in town, Lena visited Ashmoor's library. The building had shrunk with time, dusty shelves, yellowed archives, and a single librarian who hadn't changed in decades. Lena asked for the police logs from December 1989. The woman hesitated, before pointing to a box labeled Archived, Restricted. Inside were old tapes, handwritten reports, and something Lena hadn't expected. A sealed envelope addressed to her, dated 1996, 7 years after Ethan disappeared. She opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a single photograph. It showed Ethan standing in the woods, flashlight raised, staring at something just beyond the frame. But it wasn't the photo that shook her. It was the figure behind him, barely visible, inhumanly tall, black eyes, no face, arms too long. On the back, written in Ethan's handwriting, "It remembers you too." That night, Lena developed the film she had found in Ethan's drawer. The images were blurry at first, shots of the forest trail, ranger station interior, Ethan's cruiser. But the last 3 frames were different. The same angle, same spot, but each showed something approaching. First, shadows, then something stretching from the trees. In the final photo, Ethan stood in the frame, arms spread, as if shielding someone. Behind him, the shape had taken form, human-like but distorted, as if pulled apart mid-motion. Lena printed the photo, enlarged it, and studied the figure's outline. It resembled something she had drawn as a child during therapy after Ethan vanished. A dark thing, she said, followed her in dreams. She had forgotten those drawings, or tried to, until now, because the thing in the picture wasn't just familiar. It was identical. Lena returned to the sheriff's office the next day and asked to review the original disappearance report. The deputy on duty, a man in his 60s, froze when he saw her. "You're her," he said. He led her to the evidence room in silence and handed her a file with trembling hands. Inside, alongside official statements, were 2 pages never released to the public. One was a sketch Ethan had made a week before he vanished. It showed a cave hidden beneath Pine Bluff Trail, marked with a strange symbol. The other was a report from a hiker who claimed to have heard whispering voices near that same cave on December 17th, 1990. Exactly 1 year later. No one had believed him. He'd gone missing 2 weeks later. His case was never connected to Ethan's, until now. That evening, Lena returned to the forest with Ethan's old map. She followed the red circles he had drawn, noting the dates and patterns. Each one marked a disappearance, always in December, always during a snowstorm. At the final marked spot, she found an opening partially buried in ice and dead leaves. A narrow path descended beneath the earth. She hesitated, then stepped inside. The air turned cold instantly, the kind that clings to your skin. The flashlight flickered, catching glimpses of strange carvings along the stone walls, symbols Ethan had drawn in his sketch. She heard something ahead. Not an animal, not wind. A voice, familiar, calling her name. She reached for her recorder and pressed play. Nothing came through. Then softly, the recorder repeated her own voice. Don't let them remember me. The narrow passage twisted deep beneath the forest floor. Lena moved slowly, one hand tracing the damp wall while the other held her flashlight. The carvings became more frequent. Circles within circles, vertical slashes, and one symbol that repeated over and over, a hollow triangle with a slash through its center. The deeper she went, the quieter it got. No wind, no echo, just stillness, so dense it made her ears ring. The tunnel opened into a small stone chamber. In the center was an altar made of piled bones, mostly animal, but not all of them. Something rested atop the altar. A cassette recorder, identical to Ethan's from the 1980s. She pressed play. Static. Then Ethan's voice, distorted but unmistakable. They don't want out. They want remembered. She pressed stop, hands shaking. That's when she heard it. A shuffle behind her. She spun around, flashlight jerking across the walls. Nothing. But the recorder started playing again, this time on its own. Lena ran. Up through the tunnel, slipping on wet stone, her breath ragged. When she burst back into the open air, it was snowing again. Though just minutes had passed, the trail was buried. The forest looked wrong. The trees seemed too close, too tall. She reached the trailhead, but the car was gone. Her footprints, gone. She checked her watch. The hands spun slowly in reverse. Panic rising, she tried calling anyone. No signal. Her recorder still played softly in her pocket. Not Ethan's voice now. Hers, from the night before. You weren't supposed to come back. She yanked out the batteries. It kept playing. Then the audio changed. A scream echoed through the speaker. Raw, human, male. It didn't stop. It grew louder until it felt like the whole forest was vibrating with it. Then, all at once, silence. But the wind began to whisper her name. Lena finally made it back to the motel by nightfall. Room 6 was dark. She turned on the lights, but they flickered violently and went out. She lit a candle and sat on the edge of the bed, soaked and shaking. Her phone turned on by itself. A video was playing. It was her, filmed inside the forest, but from behind, like someone had followed her. Frame by frame, she walked the trail, then paused. In the background, something stood between the trees, barely visible. The figure grew clearer the longer she watched. Same build as Ethan, same uniform, but its head twitched at unnatural angles, and its eyes, black, like ink smeared across glass. She slammed the phone face down. A knock at the door. 3 slow taps. Then silence. She approached, looked through the peephole. Nothing. But when she opened the door, a single cassette tape lay on the ground. Labeled December 17th. Final. Unable to sleep, Lena borrowed an old cassette player from the front desk. She loaded the tape and pressed play. The recording began with quiet breathing. Then Ethan's voice, clear and close, as if he were speaking directly beside her. Lena, if you're hearing this, I've been gone too long, but I never left. Static surged. Then came the sound of footsteps in snow, the rustle of trees, a distant scream. Ethan again. There's a room below the ranger station. I saw myself there, but it wasn't me anymore. The tape distorted, then returned with one final phrase. If you open the door, it remembers you. If you speak its name, it follows. Lena stopped the tape. Her hands were shaking. She pulled out the map again. There was one red circle Ethan had never marked with a date. Just a symbol. She hadn't visited that location yet, but she knew she would now. She had no choice. By morning, Lena returned to Pine Bluff. The snow had stopped, but the air was unnaturally still. She followed the last unvisited point on Ethan's map. It led to a forgotten trail, overgrown and silent. The path curved sharply down a ridge and ended at a set of wooden doors embedded into the hillside, sealed shut with chains that had long since rusted through. A faded sign above read, "Maintenance Bunker. Authorized personnel only." She pried the doors open. Inside, the darkness yawned like a mouth. Steps descended into nothing. At the entrance, written in chalk across the wall, was a phrase she'd seen once before in Ethan's handwriting. "Close the memory before it opens you." She descended. The air smelled of dust and wet stone. Somewhere below, a light flickered, on its own, and a familiar voice whispered, not through the recorder this time, but from the dark itself. "Welcome back." The stairs creaked with each step as Lena descended into the bunker. The air grew colder, tighter, as if the darkness itself were pressing against her skin. Her flashlight flickered but held. The walls were lined with peeling insulation and rusted metal pipes that groaned faintly, though no water ran through them. At the bottom, she found a corridor with 4 doors, each identical, unmarked, sealed shut, but one of them stood slightly ajar. Inside was a room filled with file cabinets and a large corkboard covered in pinned photos. Most were faded images of Ethan, some in uniform, others candid, some surveillance-like. But mixed in were photos Lena had never seen before. Photos of her, as a child, as a teenager. One from just days ago, arriving in Ashmoor, taken from behind. Her hands trembled as she noticed a single photo in the center of the board. Ethan and Lena, standing together, both wearing ranger uniforms. But that picture had never been taken, because that moment hadn't happened. Yet, Lena stumbled out of the room, breathing hard. The corridor now seemed longer, stretched impossibly into shadow. She turned back toward the stairs, but they were gone. The hallway had closed behind her, leaving only a dim light ahead. Drawn forward, she found another room, this one lined with mirrors. Dozens, maybe hundreds, from floor to ceiling, all facing inward. In each reflection, she saw herself. But not as she was. Some versions had different clothes, different hair. One had blood on her hands. Another was smiling with eyes that weren't hers. She backed away, but all her reflections stayed still, except one. It stepped forward in the glass, tilting its head. Then it mouthed her name. Not Lena, but Elena. A name she hadn't heard since childhood. Her real name. She whispered it aloud, and all the mirrors shattered at once. Behind them, a door opened with a low metallic groan. Beyond the door was a chamber unlike the rest. Built of stone, it resembled a chapel, an altar, rusted candle holders, a cracked stained glass skylight high above. A single chair sat in the middle, facing away. On the wall behind it, etched deep into the rock, were words repeated over and over in jagged strokes. Remember him, remember him, remember him. The air grew hot. The flashlight dimmed again. She stepped closer to the chair. Slowly, it creaked as she reached out. And when she turned it, Ethan sat there, or something that wore his shape. His eyes were closed, lips moving without sound. His skin was pale, fingers twitching slightly. She whispered his name. His eyes opened, and they were hollow. Not dead, just overwritten, as if someone had used his body as a vessel and was still learning how to wear it. Ethan stood, or the thing that looked like him did, its head tilted, as if struggling to process the sight of her. Then it spoke. "You were supposed to stay gone." The voice cracked between the registers, as though layered with static. Lena stepped back, horrified, but her feet wouldn't move. The chapel began to vibrate, dust falling from the ceiling. Ethan's mouth opened wider than humanly possible, and a wave of whispers flooded the room. Hundreds of voices, thousands, all overlapping, all saying the same name, hers. She clutched her ears, but the sound wasn't outside. It was inside her mind. Ethan stepped forward again, hands reaching, but his shadow no longer matched his body. It moved on its own, stretching behind him, flickering across the walls like it had its own form entirely. Lena screamed. The sound was swallowed by the chapel's stone walls. She turned and ran through the door, but the hallway beyond had changed again, now lined with flickering light bulbs and dripping water. Alarms blared somewhere deep inside the facility, though no speakers were visible. The walls bled moisture and static. She passed a room with dozens of reels playing simultaneously, black and white footage of Ethan wandering Ashmoor, always alone, always looking at something off camera. She paused. One reel showed her, present-day Lena, standing behind Ethan in the forest. But she hadn't been there, or had she? She smashed the screen in panic. Sparks flew. The lights went out. And then she heard a voice, not Ethan's, but her own, from every direction at once. "You were always meant to return. You were always part of this." And in that moment, she understood. This wasn't about finding Ethan. This was about replacing him. Lena ran until her lungs burned. The facility seemed endless now. No exits, no logic to its layout. Doors led to the same hallway she had just passed. Lights flickered and died. Her flashlight was gone, but the red emergency bulbs overhead throbbed like a heartbeat. She collapsed near a junction and tried to collect herself, only to realize her hands were covered in ink-black residue. It wasn't blood. It smelled of burned metal and something older. Her recorder, still in her jacket, clicked on by itself, but it didn't play audio. It played silence, then a breath, then Ethan's voice again, slower this time, repeating the same words. "You were always the echo." She looked up and realized a mirror had appeared across from her. It wasn't reflecting her face. It showed her standing in the same hallway, but smiling, calm, composed, and not moving. Behind her, Ethan stood, and he was smiling too. Lena backed away from the mirror, but her reflection didn't move. It stayed fixed, smiling. Then it tilted its head and mouthed something she couldn't hear. She turned and ran again, heart pounding, memory distorting. She remembered being 13 again, the night Ethan vanished. She remembered him walking her home, but now that memory was wrong. In her mind's eye, he never spoke. He never moved. He just watched her. When she blinked in that memory, his eyes were black. The real hallway twisted suddenly, and she fell into a new room, one filled with desks, papers, filing cabinets, a forgotten operations center. On one of the monitors, a feed still played, a live video, outside, the forest. She saw herself standing at the tree line, but she was here. She looked closer. That version of her stepped forward, into the trees. The screen went black. She found a door marked, "Authorized entry only at the far side of the control room." It creaked open into a chamber far colder than the rest. In its center stood a tall, cylindrical tank filled with dark liquid, cables feeding into it from every wall. Something floated inside, a figure, thin, limbs too long. She wiped the condensation from the glass and saw her own face staring back. But this version was bruised, stitched, modified. Something between human and puppet. Her mouth hung slightly open. A breathing mask covered her nose. Then the eyes opened and focused directly on her. From the corner of the chamber, a low, garbled voice spoke, not over speakers. It came from inside her head. She wasn't the first. You're just the next. The tank's lights turned red. The thing inside began to move. The room shook as the tank hissed open. Lena stumbled back, but the figure didn't emerge. Instead, the door behind her slammed shut and locked. The breathing intensified. From the tank came a pulse, one that hit her in the chest like a sound wave with no sound. She fell to her knees. The lights strobed, her mind filled with overlapping voices. Her mother, Ethan, herself as a child. All speaking at once. Fragments of memory not her own. Police reports, rituals, forest fires, shadows in photographs. They remember through us, the voices said. They wear us like memory. The figure in the tank raised a hand. Her vision blurred, then cleared. She was no longer in the bunker. She was standing in Ethan's old ranger station. Daylight outside. But something was wrong. The air didn't move. The birds were silent. On the desk in front of her was a letter, addressed to her. In her own handwriting. She opened the letter with trembling fingers. The words were simple. Do not trust your memories. They are not yours anymore. Her reflection in the window showed her wearing Ethan's uniform. On the wall, a calendar marked the date, December 17th, 1989. The day Ethan vanished. But she hadn't been there. She was 13. Or was she? The door creaked behind her. Ethan stood there, same face, same uniform, but he looked at her with recognition and fear. I tried to stop them, he whispered, but they needed someone else. Someone who remembers. Someone like you. She stepped closer, and then she felt it. Her body no longer responded like before. Her limbs heavier, her voice gone. And in that moment, as she looked into Ethan's eyes, she realized the terrible truth. She hadn't come to find Ethan. She had come to replace him. And the facility below hadn't just buried him. It had made room for her. Lena stared at her own reflection in the window, barely recognizing what stared back. The uniform clung to her like it had always been there. Her badge, Ethan's badge, rested on her chest, cracked down the center. Outside, the world remained frozen, locked in an eerie, lifeless gray. She reached for her phone, but it was gone. The desk drawer held nothing except a faded photograph. Her and Ethan, standing in front of the ranger station. She'd never posed for it. The back was signed in her handwriting, "Remember what isn't yours." She ran outside, desperate for motion, for anything real. But the town was different. Ashmoor looked the same gas station, same library. But none of the people moved. They stood still on the sidewalks, eyes closed like mannequins. She shouted. No one flinched. Then all at once, every head turned to face her. Their eyes opened. They all had Ethan's eyes. She stumbled back toward the forest, breath catching in her throat. The mannequins didn't follow. They only watched, blinking slowly. From the trees, a radio hissed. A familiar voice bled through. Echo. Respond. Static. Echo. This is Granger. I repeat. The copy is active. Lena froze. She recognized the voice, but it didn't come from any direction. Just her head. Something about the copy rattled her. Had she been a replacement all along? She ran until she found the old ranger trail again. The snow was gone now, replaced by wet leaves and soil. She knelt, searching for footprints, but none were hers. Only Ethan's, looping back and forth, forming a spiral. In the center was another badge, but this one was pristine, untouched by time. As she reached for it, a scream erupted from the trees. Her own voice echoed back at her, layered and hollow. The scream drew her deeper into the woods. Branches clawed at her jacket as she stumbled through the undergrowth. She found a clearing with a mirror nailed between two trees. It wasn't reflective. It showed a version of the ranger station's basement, dim and pulsing with red light. She stared as the mirror image slowly turned. It was her, walking through the underground corridor again. But this time, she saw herself enter a sealed room. Inside, dozens of other Lenas stood motionless, some older, some younger, some broken, twitching, incomplete. In the mirror, she turned and locked eyes with herself. Her reflection smiled, and then whispered, "You're almost ready." The mirror cracked, a fracture racing across the bark like lightning. Behind her, a low groan filled the air. She turned. One of the Lenas from the mirror now stood in the clearing. The double took a step forward. Its body wasn't quite right, too stiff, movements lagging like a puppet pulled by loose string. Its voice came out flat. "You were always the last." Lena raised a rock defensively, but the double didn't attack. It only lifted its sleeve, revealing the same mark etched into Ethan's badge, a triangle crossed by a vertical line. The symbol pulsed faintly. "They can't enter our world," it said. "Not fully. Not unless we give them shape. Memory is the invitation." The double stepped closer, its skin beginning to flake like ash. "If you don't become him, someone else will. That's the price." Before Lena could speak, the double collapsed into dust. The mark lingered in the dirt, glowing red. Above her, wind stirred the trees. And for the first time, Lena heard laughter, childlike, and not far away. Following the sound, Lena returned to the hill above the bunker entrance. The doors were gone. The ground had swallowed them. In their place stood a single wooden cross, marked only with Ethan's initials. She dropped to her knees, overwhelmed. Nothing felt real anymore. Her memories fought each other, one part of her recalling a normal childhood, another filled with images of files, cameras, interrogations. She reached for her recorder and hit play. A new message was there, not in her voice, not in Ethan's, something older, slower. "You carried the story. You fed it. Now become it." Her vision blurred, her fingers trembled, and in the distance, over Ashmoor, the sirens began. Not from emergency vehicles, but from the woods. Deep, low and harmonic. Not warning something was coming, but welcoming it. And Lena knew. Chapter 1 was never Ethan's. It had always been hers. The sirens echoed across the valley, low and rhythmic like a ritual being summoned from the trees. Lena stood at the foot of the wooden cross, her breath fogging in the cold air. She felt the ground pulse beneath her boots, as if something ancient stirred below. She opened the recorder again. Static. Then a single line whispered in her own voice, reversed and distorted. She played it backward. The message was clear. The story doesn't end. It replaces. Thunder cracked above. Though no clouds moved, the trees shivered, and from the far side of the trail, someone approached. A man in uniform. Ethan, or something wearing his skin. He walked slowly, arms loose, eyes fixed on her, not with recognition, but hunger. His voice came from too deep in his throat. "It took me 7 years. You won't need that long." She ran, back down the trail, past the ridge, ignoring the bruising pain in her legs. But Ethan followed without effort, gliding across the terrain like he'd never left it. At the edge of the forest, Lena tripped and tumbled into a shallow ravine. There, she found something impossible, a stone altar buried beneath pine needles and frost. Carved into its surface were dozens of names, all familiar, all people who had vanished from Ashmoor since the 1970s. The last one etched freshly. Lena Ward. She screamed. Behind her, the sound of boots stopped. Ethan stood at the rim of the ravine, silent. Then he knelt and whispered toward the stone. The markings glowed faint red, The trees around her began to move, not sway. Shift, bending inward, forming a circle. She wasn't trapped by trees. She was inside something's eye. Lena clutched the badge she still carried, now burning hot in her palm. She remembered Ethan's final message. Close the memory before it opens you. What did it mean? Around her, the forest shifted, trunks cracking, branches clawing toward the sky. Whispers filled the air, repeating her name, first softly, then louder, until it became a chant. She looked up and saw them, dozens of versions of herself standing at the tree line, silent, watching. None blinked, none breathed. She dropped the badge. It landed flat on the altar. The light vanished, and the ground opened beneath her. Not a fall, but a pull, downward, like being swallowed by thought. One of the doubles stepped forward and spoke in her exact voice. You are the story now. Darkness folded around her like a second skin. When Lena opened her eyes, she was standing in a place that resembled Ashmoor, but not quite. The buildings were there, but frozen in time. The people stood still in their routines, like statues awaiting a cue. She walked into the library. Inside, every book had the same title. Ward, L, Archive Attempt 7. She pulled one from the shelf. It flipped itself open. Page after page described her steps exactly as they had happened, down to her thoughts and doubts. The final page was blank, and a pen rested on the desk beside it. Behind her, a voice she hadn't heard since childhood whispered, "Write it differently this time." She turned. Her mother stood there, or something wearing her mother's smile. Its eyes were missing. Lena fled the library, heart pounding. The streets of Ashmoor had begun to flicker like a dying film reel, frames skipping, colors desaturating. Every few seconds, reality warped. The town folding in on itself. She turned a corner and nearly ran into Ethan again. This time, his body looked wrong. Too tall, arms bending backward, smile too wide. But he didn't speak. He held out his hand, offering her the recorder. She took it, pressed play. Her own voice whispered a phrase she didn't remember saying. The key was never finding him. It was forgetting me. And suddenly, it made sense. She was never meant to escape Ashmoor. She was meant to become its next anchor. A memory trapped in someone else's future. The sirens began again. Ethan nodded, and the street vanished beneath her feet. Lena landed hard, but not on earth. The surface beneath her felt soft, like dense fog woven into ground. Around her was an infinite plane of echoing space, where every footstep she took repeated back with delay. Floating above were fragments of Ashmoor, buildings, rooms, streets, turning slowly in midair like pieces of a broken memory. This wasn't a place. It was a container, a holding ground for forgotten people. Echoes walked past her, children without faces, police officers with no mouths, old women mumbling backwards. She wasn't hallucinating. She was inside someone else's memory, or what was left of it. Then she saw it, a towering black doorway hovering at the center of the void. Something on the other side wanted in, and it was pushing through her name. She approached the doorway, its surface rippling like tar stretched thin. Symbols pulsed across its frame, the same ones carved in Ethan's notebook, the ones she'd ignored. The badge in her pocket glowed hot again. She pressed it to the doorway, and it sank into the surface like water. The tar trembled. The voices returned, layered, louder, more urgent. She knows now. She opened it. She remembers. The doorway split open. Not like a door, but like a wound. And from it emerged a figure. Not Ethan. Not Lena. A blend of both. A hollowed version, stitched together with forgotten truths and stolen memories. Its skin flickered with images. Her childhood, Ethan's last patrol, the cave, the recorder. It stepped toward her and said in a voice she felt in her spine, You are what we wear to stay remembered. The figure raised a hand. Shadows whipped outward like roots, wrapping around Lena's arms, pulling her forward. She struggled, screaming, but her voice fell flat in the void. The thing leaned close. Its breath smelled of pine and static. Say your name, it whispered. Say who you were. She tried. Nothing came out. Her memories began to unravel. Her mother's face, Ethan's kindness, her first camera, all melting into each other. The void spun. She remembered standing in the woods, alone, as a child, whispering to something in the trees. She had called it. Even then, she had asked to be remembered, and something had answered. The doorway began to close, and the creature offered one last choice. Leave through me, or stay as you are. Lena closed her eyes. She felt everything. The cold metal of the badge, the dirt under Ethan's boots, the grief in her mother's hands. None of it belonged to her alone anymore. She wasn't just Lena. She was the sum of every echo that had passed through Ashmoor, and that realization gave her control. She screamed, not in fear, but in rejection. The shadow binding shattered. The creature recoiled. The symbols on the doorway flickered. She ran toward it and leapt through, dragging the badge behind her like a torch. The void cracked, shattered like glass, and light poured through. Not warm, not holy, but real. And real was all she needed. As she fell through the doorway, the void behind her collapsed, but a whisper followed her out. Someone else will open it again. She awoke in the woods, pine needles beneath her, snow falling gently. The ranger station stood intact behind her. Her hands were bruised, scraped, but real. No voices, no shadows, just silence. She stood and walked back into town. Ashmoor looked normal. People moved. Cars passed. The world spun forward. But as she passed the gas station, the clerk inside stared at her, unmoving, a faint smile on his lips. In the motel, room 6 was freshly cleaned, but her name was written on the mirror in condensation. And outside the library, a new bench plaque read, "In memory of Lena Ward, 1996. She touched it. Cold metal. Behind her, a child stared, then smiled. "I heard your story," he said. "I'll remember." And that's when she understood. The ritual didn't end. It moved forward, through memory, through others, through stories. Lena walked through Ashmoor like a ghost wearing skin. Everything was familiar, but somehow shifted, just off enough to feel staged. The sheriff waved to her from across the street, but she couldn't recall his name. A child rode past on a bicycle, whistling the same 3 notes she'd heard on the tape labeled Final. At the diner, the waitress brought her black coffee without asking, then said, "Back again, huh?" The words chilled her. Lena sat by the window, watching fog roll in, and opened her notebook. Her handwriting didn't match anymore. Pages she didn't write filled the middle. Descriptions of the void, of the creature, of what it meant to carry memory. One sentence was underlined again and again. To be remembered is to be trapped. She closed the notebook. Outside, someone in an old patrol uniform walked past. It wasn't Ethan. It was her. She followed the figure, heart racing, down the alley behind the old movie theater. The uniformed woman walked with the same limp Lena had after the fall in the woods. At the end of the alley, the woman stopped and turned. Her face was identical to Lena's, but blank, uninhabited. Then it smiled and said, "It's easier the second time." Before Lena could react, the double vanished in a flicker of static. On the wall behind it, graffiti read, "December 17th, never ends." Back at the motel, her reflection flickered again. This time, her reflection moved a second too late. She reached toward the mirror, and the glass was warm. A memory surfaced, of her as a child, whispering to a tree, asking it not to forget her. She had made the bargain long ago. The story had been waiting ever since. The library's archive was the last place she knew to go. In the basement, a microfilm reel labeled Granger E. Supplemental caught her eye. She loaded it. The screen displayed surveillance footage from 1996, 7 years after Ethan vanished. The timestamp matched the exact day she arrived in town. The camera captured Ethan entering the ranger station, alone. But at the desk behind him, a young girl sat drawing in a notepad. It was Lena. She had been there, but she had no memory of it. The footage jumped. The girl stood. Ethan placed the badge in her hand. The screen glitched. Then a frame showed the ranger station empty, except for the badge on the table and the drawing. A door made of bones and names. She pulled the reel from the machine, heart pounding. What she remembered was never real. What she'd forgotten was the truth. Outside, snow began to fall again, thick, slow flakes that fell straight down with no wind. Lena wandered to the church on the hill, the one that had been closed since 1989. Its door was open. Inside, the pews were filled, not with people, but with shadows shaped like people, all faced forward. At the altar, a mirror floated in midair, slowly rotating. In its reflection was not the church, but the forest, Pine Bluff, and in that reflection, Lena stood at the trailhead, holding a badge. Her present self approached the mirror. Her reflection raised its hand. She mirrored it. They touched, and the church vanished. She was in the forest again, on December 17th, alone, cold. The trail ahead led into the trees. She walked, because she always had. She followed the path, her feet knowing the steps before she could think. The recorder in her pocket played again. This time, the voice was neither hers nor Ethan's. It was the voice of the town, layered, ancient, male and female, young and old. Stories don't end. They just wear new names. At the final bend, she saw it. The altar, the badge, the circle of trees. The air grew still, and from behind her, the wind whispered, "Ready?" She didn't turn. She stepped into the circle. Her voice was calm as she spoke. "I remember." The ground opened. Light swallowed her. And above Ashmoor, the snow began to fall in reverse. Lena was no longer in Ashmoor. She stood in a space between breath and memory, surrounded by the fragments of every person the town had ever forgotten. Faces flickered in and out of being. Voices repeated old confessions. Lost patrol logs, whispered bedtime promises. The forest, the town, the station, they were not places. They were constructs built to contain stories too dangerous to be forgotten. And Lena was no longer an outsider. She had crossed the threshold. Her body remained in the circle beneath the trees, but her presence now lived inside every shadow trail, every unmarked report, every voice that went unanswered on the radio. She was the echo now. In a house on the edge of town, a little girl drew pictures in crayon. One showed a forest with a doorway. Another, a woman in a ranger's uniform standing beneath falling snow. Her mother entered and paused. "Who is she?" the mother asked. The girl smiled. "She's the watcher. She makes sure people don't get forgotten." The woman touched the drawing. "How do you know her name?" The girl looked up, eyes wide. "She told me last night." On the radio behind them, static crackled once, then whispered 3 words. "Echo. Returning. Complete." Years passed. Ashmoor remained quiet. But every winter, on December 17th, the snow fell earlier than it should. People whispered about figures near Pine Bluff, rangers that didn't work for the state, children who spoke of voices in the wind. A new officer joined the local force. Her name was unfamiliar, but her face felt familiar to all, calm, watching. And every so often, someone would report a radio transmission with no source. Always the same message. She remembers, and she's waiting. But no one ever dared follow the signal, Because stories, real stories, don't end. They wait. The final entry in the old ranger station's logbook was dated 7 years from the present day. The handwriting was Lena's. If you're reading this, then you've already heard the story. The trail never really closes. It shifts. And if you feel the need to follow it, don't follow me. Follow the silence. It's where I went. It's where I am. Beside the note was a mirror, not reflecting the room, but the woods. In the mirror, the trees moved, and someone, no longer just Lena, walked beneath them, and deep beneath the town, sealed in stone and memory. The recorder clicked one last time. Static. Then Ethan's voice, clearer than ever. We never truly disappear. We become what's left behind. The eyes watching the trail, the voice on the other end. If you hear me now, then the door never closed. Then silence, except for a faint hum beneath the silence. A second voice. Lena's. You came looking for answers. Now you are one. If this story kept you up, then you already understand. Some places never stop calling. Mystery stories like this aren't just entertainment. They're reminders that memory is fragile and truth sometimes wears many faces. What happened in Ashmoor still haunts the silence between radio static and forest wind. If you felt it, don't ignore it. Subscribe for more mystery stories, unsolved secrets, and dark tales that follow the trail few dare to take. And next time you hear your name in the snow, don't answer, just walk. Because once a story remembers you, it never lets go.